Hi, my name is Trolls, and in this video we're gonna go on the ultimate journey into our studio steel drum, otherwise known as steel pan. But before we get the video started, let me preface that this library contains over 55,000 samples, and it is the definitive and most ultimate sampled steel drum ever done, and it's actually to a degree that we'll never have to touch it again. One of our philosophies, sort of starting with deep sampling and almost venturing into extreme deep sampling, if you will, is that we want to sample instruments to a degree that you never ever have to ever think about the sample library again, and that is certainly the case with this library. And let me explain why. Let's just look at the core articulations here. We actually sampled the steel drum with 10 velocity layers and 10 round robin, using both beaters, those are the traditional sort of bamboo mallets you use for the steel drum, but also with felt mallets, brushes, hands. We also did rolls both for the beater, mallet, brush, hand rolls. And then we have 5 different microphone options. These are all beautiful vintage mics that we recorded from different positions, as you can see here in the 3D graphics. And on top of that, you have the core articulations here, but we also did prepared articulations. So you actually have the steel drums recorded with both nails, strong, rattle, percussive effects. You can also sync through it. The body of the steel drum is really resonant, so it really catches up on dynamics. So you can do these weird sort of almost, if you watch the movie Arrival, you can do these crazy like Arrival effects by singing through the steel drum. There's a lot of content in it. And on top of that, we also sampled it through 2 world-class reverbs, the TC6000 and the Sony Bricasti. So if you really want a high-quality reverb, you also got that in the library. But let me just play the demo I've created here. This is a somewhat elaborate demo, predominantly using a variety of different articulations from the library, both using beaters, mallets, brushes, hands, all that stuff. And on top of that, I'm using a couple of other 8DO libraries, including the Guitar, which came out recently, and our Studio Percussion Auxiliary, which is really great for super realistic percussion. And there's something magical about this library because you can do stuff like Solaris, those really motion picturesque, soft, emotional type of vibes with it. Or you can swing to the other side and do sort of happy steel drum band music if you want the more Caribbean style. But let me just play the demo here and let's talk a little more about the origin of the drum and all the articulations, and let me show you what you can actually do with this library. 55,000 samples is a lot, so there's a lot to show you in this library. You might just think it's a steel drum, but there's a lot more going on than just that. So let's get started. Alright, so that was my little interpretation of what a studio steel drum can be used for. A little bit between the sort of motion picturesque and the normal sort of traditional steel drum kind of feel. And the steel drum actually has a really interesting history. It's one of the newer instruments in the sort of contemporary instrument families. And it's always a question I ask myself, like, where's the new instruments? When was the last time we saw an instrument? Obviously the hang drum, which is sort of derived from the steel drum, and the gong. But the steel drum, which sort of goes back to the 1940s, is still one of the newest instruments we've seen sort of on the worldwide scale. So I just find it interesting that we don't see more new instruments, and it's really sad. And one of the things we try with ATO is to create new instruments, both sort of in the virtual sense, but also to build them, and whether it's our Presentar, Radivader, Renschenspiels, or glass marimbas, all that stuff, to push the bar a little bit for what an instrument can be, so we're not just down to pianos and keyboards and drums and bass and guitars and all that stuff. So with all that said, one of the reasons we did the steel drum was also to sort of take and see if we could mangle it in more ways than just one. So not just using the traditional bamboo beaters, but also use different kind of mallets and brushes and hands and nails and string it and rattle and all that stuff. But anyway, that's a lot of talking. Let's go in and listen to the demo a little more specifically. Let me start here with what I call the bass beaters here. I actually took the instrument and down-tuned it 12 semitones. It's something I always love doing on the hang drum as well. They have an amazing bass sound in them. Check them out. Super clean bass sound. It's actually almost pitch perfect, and I don't know why, because it's funny, the steel drum has a little bit of pitch variation when you play it harder, but particularly in the softer velocities, it's beautiful. And you can also see we have what's called a responsive button here. If you take the response down, and you're going to see me doing that on some of the patches, the instrument plays softer and corresponds softer to the velocity pressure on your keyboard. It just gives it a more sort of tempered sound. The next one I had here is sort of my melodic patch, also using the beaters, but you can see I actually took the response button and put it way down. I sort of like the more soft qualities in the steel drum. So when you take the response button down here, you sort of dial down the velocity layers. As I mentioned previously, we have 10 velocity layers and we have 10 round robin for most of the things going on here. So there's a lot. But check it out. It's so nimble, and you can play the most sort of gorgeous solos on it. Or more complicated stuff like this one up here. Let me show you this one. I'm playing hard on the keyboard here, so you can hear it burn through more of the velocity layers. You get a little more of that detuned quality in the steel drum. I also used another variation of the steel drum for the chords. So this one is playing with felt mallets, and it's way softer in its sound. And that's one of the great things about recording it in such depth, that we actually could sort of get different timbres out of the instrument. In this case, using soft mallets, great for sort of a chord-based stuff, more of that Solaris, sad texture stuff. And then one of my other favorite instruments from the ATO catalog, this is from our Aura auxiliary percussion, and in this case I'm using our shakers. And if you're not familiar with this library, let me just explain it, because it's using some proprietary techniques that we've patented that are really, really awesome for hyper-realistic percussion. Essentially, I'm going to be triggering a shaker groove right now, but I'm moving my mod wheel up and down. You can see here on the dynamics, and that actually allows me to sort of shape the exact pattern and dynamics of the shaker as well. It's just fantastic for really, really ultra realistic percussion, and we have other videos, of course, where I'm demonstrating this in great length. But if you're looking for the most comprehensively deep sampled expressive percussion, this is really the library when it comes to auxiliary percussion. We also have it for orchestral instruments and exotic percussion, but just check it out. This is just a shaker. It's one key on the keyboard triggering a loop. You also have multi-samples, of course, if you want that. So you can see as I'm moving the mod wheel, I'm actually shaping the dynamics of the shaker here. And you can actually play it any tempo you want, whether it's triplets or it's slower. It's recorded multiple tempos, multiple dynamics. You can do anything you want with percussion. It's just a phenomenal library. And on top of that, you probably heard I used this sort of almost like ambient texture in the beginning of the demo that was using the Mallet rolls here and then just softly crossfading through the dynamic layers. Let me just show you here. It's just awesome for those sort of more ambient textures. Obviously, these are loops, so they'll go in infinity. And then we briefly also mentioned that we actually have 25 additional effects patches in the library where you can really try out more extreme things, whether it's sort of ambience is like the one we just saw, or it's some of the effects we got here. Let me also play this one here. This is actually using what we call rattles. So Rattles is one of the more experimental patches in the library. Obviously we put tiny metal strings over the steel drum to make it rattle more, and you get that sort of prepared feeling. So this is one of the prepared articulations we both had with nails, strung, percussive effects, and some human vocal effects as well. And the rattle is interesting because it sounds kind of ugly in its own, but I actually used this sort of as a jazz brush kind of simple. Let's listen to the demo in context here so you'll understand. Another of my favorite instruments is the Kaiser Drum. The Kaiser Drum is actually from another volume of our studio percussion called Exotic Studio Percussion. The Kaiser is also derived from the steel drum and the hang drum. It's sort of inverted. This is concave, but the Kaiser Drum is inverted, so you play it more like a turtle shell, if you will, and it's awesome for bass notes. So I actually used it as a bass enhancer on top of the down-tuned steel drum. I added the Kaiser Drum here as well. It's just super fat in the low range. And you can probably hear it had a little bit of that sort of steel drum quality. Let's play a little bit. It's just a beautiful instrument and really goes well together with the steel drum. On top of that, I also used some nails here. We actually played the steel drum softly without damaging it too much with nails. And I used these to enhance a little bit of sort of a particular percussive pattern. I actually like the sound of the nails because the attack is a little more pronounced. Let me just solo it here, and then I'll play a little bit of the demo because it's a little bit unique what it's doing, but it almost gave me a little more defined attack in the note, and I just happen to like that sound on top of the other steel drums as well. Let me just isolate it here. So it doesn't sound like much on its own, but if you hear in context to the rest of the composition here, it actually adds a little more sort of percussive definition to the sound. And of course, you also had our 1928 Steinway piano up here. This is my personal piano. It's standing right in my living room, and it's still my favorite piano. When it comes to that more soft scoring kind of piano, it's just perfect. And we also have a few more things. I'm actually using our studio auxiliary percussion, Cajun and tambourine together here. And it's actually a good example of the two sort of different articulation types we have in our auxiliary percussion and our other studio percussive libraries. So the Cajun is played as multi-samples and the tambourine is just triggered using our more advanced sampling. And together it's just awesome, just realistic, super easy to use. You have it all in your hands. Whether it's multi-samples or deep phrase sampling, you can virtually do anything you want, just easy to use. And you can probably hear everything is a little bit loose. one of the unique things, and it's a question I get often, is like, why do the demos sound so alive and all that? And as I've mentioned in many of the other videos, stay away from quantization. Not a lot of things were quantized in this demo. I'd rather just play it again until it sort of sits right with the composition. And sometimes you've got to move the notes a little bit, particularly with strings and other things, to make sure they really sit the right way. But I just like when there's more life in the sound that way, and more life and expressiveness in your playing style. And that actually also goes for the guitar solo. Let me just find it right here. Let me trigger the solo on its own. This is from our new guitar library in our advanced guitar series. This is one of my favorite libraries as well. It's super easy to use. This was played in first take. Just having fun with instrument, and it's one of those instruments, it just works right off the keys. There's no CCs, no key switches, no nothing. It's just me playing. And again, you can hear there's a little bit of timing issues. It's not always super precise, but it's kind of like it would be in reality if you're playing a nylon or an instrument of that nature, sort of a little more expressive, and you sort of slide and deliberately delay your notes a little bit. So this is an example of what I would call a sloppy demo. I'm really more focused on expression as a whole. You can also hear that particularly in the second part here with the steel drum, that is almost sort of out of sync with the rest of the composition. I almost got like disgustingly emotional when I played the solo here. Let me just trigger this part so you understand what I'm saying. And here's my pledge to you. We at DO will never have to sample this instrument again, and you will never need to consider investing into another steel drum library in your entire lifetime. That's how confident we feel about it. Whether it's the best vintage mics in existence, you can read more about them on the website. Whether it's the 2 best hardware reverbs in the world, whether it's all the articulations you could dream of, or prepared articulations, it all culminates in a 55,000 sample deep library. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Let's wrap it up here by listening to the demo one more time, and thanks for watching.